Hello, welcome to Good News on Entertainment. I'm your host, Carley. We have a great show today that I truly think will not only entertain, but educate as well. Our guest today has been on a mission for years to tackle life's most difficult questions. Is the history found in the Bible real? Is it fact or fiction? What does hard evidence really have to say about the foundational stories in the Bible? Today, we sit down with Timothy Mahoney, the award-winning investigative filmmaker who has questions many of us have had as well, but yet he is dedicated his life to finding answers and then sharing them with the world.
For over 20 years, I've researched the Exodus. I found patterns of evidence that confirm the story. But this story became personal in a way that surprised and amazed me. Growing up, my home wasn't a safe place. There's something very dangerous about my dad. There is a pattern of evidence that supports and confirms there is a God who controls everything. And I'm learning to believe like never before. He truly loves me.
All right, so here we are, Tim. I am so excited to pick your brain a little bit today, hear about your faith story, your faith journey. We have a lot to get into. How are you?
I'm good. I'm warm. I'm up in Minnesota, and I understand you're in Florida. So we are two other parts of the country.
Oh, I know it. Well, I think our conversation is going to warm some hearts today because, again, you're just so inspiring. I think you've put a lot of hard work into these films and the documentaries that you've done to really help spread the message, I think, that we're all looking for answers on why we're here, if God is real. And your story is pretty remarkable. So before we get into, because if I did the math right, I believe there's 6 films, soon to be a 7th, right, in the Patterns of Evidence series.
That's correct. Yes, we've got. Hard to believe that there's that much, but there's quite a bit that we investigate on. We use the word patterns of evidence, and it's a scientific approach. And so we look in the Bible at what are key events or things that happen, and we look for a pattern of that, and then we go and look back in history and archaeology and geography and different locations where things were to have happened, and that's how we start to look for a pattern of evidence for events of God acting in history.
My biggest passion right now is I have 3 kiddos. They're being raised in a Christian home, but you never want them to believe just because mom and dad believe. They have to have their own experience. So you have and know that what they're reading out of the Bible is factual. So you have this component that you've dedicated your life now to. Mm-hmm. And then there's this also component that's one of your films that I just absolutely love because it really dives into your personal story and testimony. So let's really dive in there. And your story, as all of us, starts as a little kid. And you acknowledge that your home, unfortunately, was not a safe home. Is that where your story kind of starts?
It does. I grew up in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota here, and my mother was a girl from the farm, and she actually was a trained music teacher. She had her degree in music, and my father was a police officer. He had been in the military, and I was the first of the family. I was the firstborn, and but my dad had a lot of stress in his life, a lot of trauma, and his mother died. In fact, almost in front of him, and then he was abused by some neighbor, and he had a lot of anger, and then he went off to war, and he was in a very serious war situation called Pork Chop Hill in the Korean War, and he was wounded. His entire team was wiped out, so he had a lot of trauma in his life, and so I felt really that I needed to make a film about making patterns of evidence, but why was it so important to me that I would in some cases, risk my life to go into the Middle East and to investigate whether the events of the Bible happen. And it's because of my family's, my mother's, my grandmother's belief that God's word was trustworthy, that the things that happen in the Old Testament, that they were actually true historical events, and that we could trust God just like the Israelites trusted God. And so once I learned about people saying, well, there's no evidence for this and it really didn't happen, I got very interested, and somehow I believe I was called to become involved and take the last several decades of my life and be I'm an investigative filmmaker, so I went on a huge investigation.
When did it become clear for you that you believed in God and that, you know, it was your calling now to maybe answer some of the questions that a lot of people still have?
Well, let's go back, because we started with this idea of, childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what was very interesting is that my father actually was the one who led me in a prayer to accept Jesus into my heart. I was at a camp that he was speaking at. As a police officer, he often would be called to go, and he was known as a Christian police officer. And he was a ventriloquist, and he had, he loved kids and wanted to entertain and minister to them. And so he gave an invitation at the end of one of his talks, and it was to accept Christ. And I felt in my heart this sense that I needed to accept Christ. And I was probably 5 years old. And I noticed that something changed in my life. But at the same time, even though my father had this one side of him, there was another side to him that he was struggling with. He had his own dark issues that he was struggling with, and he would get very angry. And there's one time when he picked me up. I was in bed. It was a hot summer night, and my sister hit her head. And my dad thought that I had done something to my sister, and he got up and he was upset, and he picked me and he threw me across the room, and I actually hit a wall and slid down this wall and picked me and threw me again. And my mother was crying for help from God, and she took me and kind of wrapped me up and got me out of the area. And I from that point on, this is a moment when you ask, well, when do you feel like, God was there? She took me to this little sewing room in the lower level of our house. So everybody was upstairs. This is an older home, and it had like a back sewing room, little bedroom, that there was actually a little bed there. And I think it was a place where my grandmother would maybe stay when she would come. And my mother, I remember, I can see her right now kneeling and praying for me and praying that God would protect me. And that was the moment, I think, in my life when I really felt that there was a God, and that I had I needed to trust him, because I realized that I was in a dangerous situation. I couldn't explain it. I mean, when you're a kid, these things happen, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who could relate to this. You're minding your own business. I never did anything to my sister. I was just trying to go to sleep, and then all of a sudden this eruption of violence took place. And so that was sort of the beginning of the end of our family as my dad got worse and worse.
You know what I love about that story, as traumatic and awful as it is I think it also shows, when we do pray for others, whether it be your own kids, family members, how powerful that can be when you're inviting, the Holy Spirit in to take over a situation that, I think that should encourage us to do that more in times of trauma like that, to just stop and pray.
I think there's a lot of people that have memories that are very, very fresh, and meaning they can go back to them. And it was either a time when something awful happened, or they were demeaned, or they were said, something was spoken to them that was negative, and forever they've been carrying that negative impression in their person. And we all need to be free from that. And the thing that helped me was that I had a mom who went through a fire, and by that time I had a brother and two younger sisters there, and so we went into hiding, and we went. My dad eventually left the state and sort of abandoned us. So my mother was a pianist at the church, and not just for that reason, but the church was our refuge. So we ended up going to church, whenever the doors were open. Our community was really people within our church, and there was another family that also was from a broken home. And at that time, it was really embarrassing because, not having a dad around. First of all, we lived on welfare, and so things were tight, But God would provide. And my mother would pray, and my grandmother would pray. But it also kept a number of things in focus as far as I felt like I needed to be more serious about, what I was doing in my life. And I got involved with music early on, and Uncle helped me to learn how to play guitar, and I learned how to play other instruments and got involved with Christian music, which was great. And eventually it led me to become interested in photography and in filmmaking when I became.
I was thinking that's the creative brain there for you. So then you fast forward to kind of this, traumatic young childhood, but you find rescue in the church, and certainly through your mom's dedication, faithful dedication as well. And then you get into, what's your first kind of big career kind of move? Because again, I don't know if at that age you really pictured yourself having 7 documentaries under your belt about proving the Bible.
Right. What my first big career move was right into a body shop, because out of high school, my uncle said to me, "You should learn a trade," and he said, "I think you should. I'll teach you how to paint cars." And that's part of my story too, is that I did learn how to paint cars, and eventually I worked from the time I was 18 until I was 30 years old in a body shop as a car painter. And through that time, I liken it to, a number of people, but let's just say it's like Joseph, where Joseph had a vision that he wanted to do something. So when I was 18 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I went and saw a movie called The Hiding Place, which is a Billy Graham film about this family, especially one particular woman, Corrie ten Boom, and her family. They were in Holland, and they hid Jewish people in a room in their home until they were caught. And that was the first movie I saw when I was 18 years old. And I ended up seeing it 3 times in 1 week. And eventually I was like, wow. The thought came to me after 2 years of college that wouldn't it be great if I could become a filmmaker, and I went to film school then. And
were you thinking a faith-based filmmaker or just a filmmaker in general?
No, I was thinking of a faith-based filmmaker. Yeah. And it's taken me a while to understand too, because the films that I make, the patterns of evidence films, are films that are basically having a conversation with the world at large. So our first film was on Netflix worldwide, and our films have fortunately been able to be in theaters. So I try to make the films in the investigations so that they are multi-viewpoint. So I'll hear from people that might be agnostic, people that are believers, people that are scientists, archaeologists, and historians, all sorts of different types of people. So you're going to hear different points of view. But that's important because people aren't free to make a decision unless they hear more of the argument. And so if you only have one point of view, which a lot of films today and a lot of media is really more, it looks like a documentary, but it's really a propaganda piece.
I was just going to say that you have to know, I think, who's funding, the documentaries. And generally, I hate to say it, but there can be angles and agendas they are trying to persuade you towards. And I remember watching the one documentary. I haven't had a chance to see all of them yet, But some of the people that you interview in there, they still don't believe in God. I mean, it is pretty interesting that you keep those in there. I think that does show that this is a true documentary where you're not hiding some stuff to better your case on what you're trying to prove.
Everyone, has a point of view. And I think that the patterns that we're looking at, I just want to put everything on the table so that people can see, all right, so here's what the Bible says happened in a particular situation. But I'm going to go look and try to find, if I can, is there a pattern that matches the biblical text? And then if there is, why, is it valid? Or if it's, if people have problems with it, why do they have a problem with it? And so that's been the approach that we've taken with these investigations.
Let's break down some of these films, because again, I kind of want people, if they have not heard of these films yet or want to learn more, I want to give them a big picture and kind of the timeline too, because from what I understand, did you know at the beginning of all these, okay, I'm going to do this one on this subject and go down here? And I mean, it seemed like you really kind of let it breathe and you let the investigation, from what I can tell, take you on a journey that you weren't even sure where it was going to completely take you.
Yeah, that's the both exciting and difficult part about some of this type of filmmaking, is that you don't start with a script. You start really with a question. Is there evidence for the Bible? I have a line that I wrote. It says, I grew up, I was raised to believe the Bible and the stories of the Bible were true. But as I grew older, I was challenged to lose those beliefs. Now I just want to know, is there any evidence for this? Well, you know what? There's millions and millions of people. I would probably even call them lots of prodigals, people who maybe grew up in a family that believed in the Bible, but for all the different cares of life, all the different temptations of the world, all the different things, arguments that have come to challenge the Bible and the reasons why we should believe it, and maybe the things we should obey or practice in it, come along and challenge somebody. And so I was no different than that. But when I'd heard about people searching for evidence of the Exodus, my heart was already interested in history, and I was interested in the Bible. And I didn't know, when I went on that investigation over 20 years ago, that it would take about 12 years to come to the end of that, to be able to come to a conclusion. 12 years was like a long time.
Maybe if you knew it was 12 years at the beginning, you would have said, no. No.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk about the first one. So Exodus, that was the very first one that you knew, okay, I'm going to start here.
I think what happened, well, I know that people said they were searching and they found chariot wheels on the bottom of the seafloor, and they thought this is where this is where the sea was parted and the Israelites crossed. And then they were saying that they found evidence from Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. Those two big ideas, over 25 years ago, were really compelling. And I was a filmmaker looking for a film to make. And even though I should probably have said it this way, I was a wannabe filmmaker looking for a film to make, because I don't think I didn't really know how to make a film. And I'm still practicing the activity of filmmaking, but I have a better idea now after the seventh film what I'm doing. But I think that began it. And what we ended up finding was that many people said there's just no evidence for this. And many people have walked away from their faith because of that argument that was made. But what we ended up showing in this film, Patterns of Evidence Exodus, that there is a complete pattern of the Exodus, and it's just earlier in time. And we also explain that there's questions about how you date things. So if the dating is off, then the problem is with the dating, not with the Bible. Yeah. And then the second film we made was called The Moses Controversy. Same problem with dating. People said, well, they didn't even have anything to write with or to read. I mean, how is this transmitted, this Bible? And we end up finding that the very alphabet that we all use, and that's the universal type of alphabet used all around the world, comes at the same time and in the same place as where these early Israelites are. And it's someone took Egyptian hieroglyphs, like the bull's, let's see, I'll get over here, the bull's head, and eventually they modified certain hieroglyphics to become what would become the letter A here and other letters. So somebody modified Egyptian hieroglyphs and turned them into what would become a phonetic alphabet, which was one of the most powerful ideas in the world. And it's the basis of all alphabets now. But what does it say? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And God wants to know who he is. So in the beginning, Moses writes down the Genesis, the story of Genesis, and then he writes Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers. We know how the world began because of the alphabet. Wow. And in order for us to know who God is, we had to know who his Word. And what does it say? The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So that's the second film I had no idea we were going to make. I didn't know I was going to make the first one exactly, and I didn't know about the second one. And then from then on, I just started working my way through the Old Testament. Now we're moving into the New Testament.
So then you have the Red Sea miracles. There's two parts of those. And then there is also the Journey Home, which is your story. Yep. And then you go to Journey to Mount Sinai 1 and 2. And this is what people are eagerly awaiting. Part 2 is getting ready to come out in May. So kind of give us a little teaser of that one.
Right. Well, in Journey to Mount Sinai, I decided I was interested in this mountain called Jabal Awaz in Saudi Arabia. And why Saudi Arabia is interesting is because it is where the ancient land of Midian, and Moses fled to the land of Midian. And so that's where I started. In 2003, 20 years ago, I went. In fact, the film will be releasing almost at the same time I was in Saudi Arabia 20 years ago, investigating that mountain. And what happened then during that time was that we made the other films, and now we're just getting to this place where we're going to be showing a pattern of evidence for 6 different mountains, because there are different places people think Mount Sinai is. We're going to look at the traditional mountain, which we did in the first film, and then we're ending with Jabal Awaz. In between, there are other mountains, and I actually created a scorecard, a Mount Sinai scorecard, so you could keep track. When you watch these movies, you're able to keep track and score them, and so this is coming to a head in May here after. A long marathon of investigative filmmaking.
So before we run out of time here, I do want to ask, because everything has been so focused on Old Testament, but you mentioned New Testament. So are you also working on those as well?
I am just in the midst. Yeah, I've got books scattered all around here. I'm just in the midst of moving towards the New Testament. And what I mean by that is that we'll be dealing with the coming of the Messiah. Okay. And that is we've had it charted out, and that's something that we're looking at. And seriously, I'm hoping and praying that we'll have something very, very soon. It'll be a series of films, because the world is looking for, has been for a long time, a leader, a Messiah. The Jewish people were looking for them. Christians are, Muslims are, and people that are secular are looking for a Messiah, for some political leader. And we know the Bible tells us that there'll be actually a leader that will come and take over, take control of the world. And so, but there's only one King of Kings, as the Bible is telling us. And so I'm exploring all those big ideas. Yeah. And that'll be, that's what we're going to be working on here. So we're going to be having multiple films coming out. That's the prayer. Okay. And have multiple teams working on the different films. So we'll keep marching through the Old Testament, but now we're going into the New Testament.
All right. When you look back at your journey, it's far from over now. But is there anything that you can really pinpoint in doing all of these films that you say, okay, or is it just all the mounting evidence, that you've discovered that says, okay, this is why I'm doing it. This is why I believe in God. I mean, is it just too much to count now?
I think we get letters, and I meet a lot of different people, and I know that I could tell you different testimonies of people. I was at a college recently filming a scholar, and the student walks by and he stops and he looks at me and he goes, are you Tim Mahoney? I said, yes. He goes, you're the reason why I'm here.
Oh.
He says, I saw your movie, and he says, I'm going to become an archaeologist, and I'm going to carry on the work investigating the Bible. And I said, you're kidding. What was the chances that I would be, standing at that spot? Is it's like, 600 miles away or whatever at that time when this student walks through and he tells me that.
See, that's what I love is like you have all this factual information that the Bible is real and God is real, but then there's moments like that that aren't tangible, but yet they are, if that makes sense. It's like there's moments that you go, oh my gosh, it can't be anything but God.
During the time of COVID, there's a man who was going to commit suicide, and he thought that what he would do is watch a movie before he took his life. So he went online, and all of a sudden he found Patterns of Evidence, the Moses controversy, and he watched it, and he couldn't believe it. He then also really believed that God was real and that the Bible was true, and then he went and found another movie, and then he sent us a letter. He watched, I think, the Exodus, and he just felt like, he said, tell Tim Mahoney that he saved my life. I was so distraught. And so all I can say is that those are just a couple of, examples, but we get lots of letters from people, but those are encouragements to know that, we all need help at times. We all get down. We all have times of being discouraged, and we need to know, is this real? Is this true? And the work that I'm doing is helping people. It's helping myself. I went through a crisis of faith making these films, but we do know that God exists and that he's faithful and that he acts in history and that he acts in our own lives. And that's my encouragement to anyone who's listening to this.
And he's the same God, right? From the Old Testament as he is today, right here in 2023. That's pretty cool to think.
Absolutely.
Tim, such an honor for you to sit down, take some time with me today. I really appreciate it. Again, I know how busy you are, but I look forward to catching up again soon because, again, your journey is far from over, and I know there are a lot more films to come. So, again, we look forward to checking in with you again soon, okay?
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, I truly hope you have enjoyed this conversation as well, and more importantly, I hope it even encouraged your faith. For more info on the series and what's to come, head to patternsofevidence.com. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for Good News on Entertainment on your Christian television network. I'm Carley Boyette, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.